An unemployed vagabond from Colorado named George Nada traveled across America in search of a sunny place. That is how he found himself in Los Angeles with its skyscrapers and great opportunities. The man went to an employment agency to look for a formal job. Many people who were also looking for work gathered there. George had an interview and told an employee of the employment agency about his difficult fate. In his hometown, many businesses were closing down and people were out of work. The woman listened to George with little interest and said that he did not have enough experience to be hired. The man smiled sadly and left the recruitment agency. As George continued to wander aimlessly through the city streets, he came across a preacher and stopped to listen to him speak. The preacher emotionally told a small group of passers-by that demons had taken over the minds of the ruling class on earth and were controlling ordinary people through them. The man called on his listeners to wake up and break free from the control of the ruling elite. Noticing the police car, Nada decided to continue on his way. On the way, he saw a strange man, as if hypnotized, watching a trivial television commercial behind a store window. But Nada did not pay much attention to him and continued on his way. Eventually, George found a temporary homeless shelter and planned to spend the night there. A woman who lives next door is fascinated by a TV show about a narcissistic star who believes she will never age. George, tired, leans back in his chair and sighs heavily, lost in thought. The next day, George visits a construction site and tries to find a job as a laborer there. At first, the foreman refuses to hire Nada because they only take union workers. However, George seems persuasive, so the foreman negotiates his salary and hires him. Like everyone else, man started working with sweat on his forehead. Although his employment problem had been solved, he would only be able to receive money for a few more days, so he had nowhere to stay overnight. One of the workers, Frank, noticed the frustrated newcomer and offered to show him a place with food and hot showers. Nada was initially wary of his new acquaintance, but soon decided to follow him. Along the way, the men found topics of conversation and formed a bond. Frank took the drifter to a camp and introduced him to friendly locals who had come to Los Angeles from all over the world to seek their fortunes. There was a custom of helping one another, and even children felt comfortable in the camp. One of the local men, Gilbert, immediately assigned George to make the camp more comfortable. It was lunchtime and George was served a large, hearty meal. During the meal, Frank told George about his life. Like George, he had moved to another city to find work so he could support his family in Detroit. Frank was angry with the local elite who had pocketed the money and closed down nearly all the factories in his hometown, leaving hundreds of people unemployed. The man was losing patience and was ready to take drastic measures if at least one more factory closed. Frank believed that the lower class had to fight to survive, so he kindly warned George that he was ready to compete with him for a place in the sun. George was more optimistic. He was determined to work hard and start his life over again. In the evening, Nada walked around the camp and noticed that people were enthusiastically watching television commercials for fake nails. At one point, the signal is interrupted and a broadcast of a nervous man appears on the screen. It talks about how they all live in an artificially created world. According to him, a group of scientists have discovered that unknown beings send a special signal to Earth that puts people in a trance and takes away their ability to think critically. There is more and more poverty and racial injustice. Aliens have brainwashed people into being indifferent to everything except their own interests. However, the residents dismiss the alarming message of the weirdo on the TV. They only complain about their headaches and change the channel with the broadcast. George notices that a blind priest is standing near the group repeating every word from the broadcast. Gilbert immediately runs up to the priest. George can't hear their exchange, but figures that the men are having an argument. In a hurry, Gilbert leads the old man towards the church, located on the camp territory. George's eyes follow the retreating men for a little longer, and he suspects that they have some kind of secret. The following morning, Nada meets Gilbert by the camp entrance and decides to ask about his nightly trip to the church. The man says that the church provides a communal kitchen for the homeless, and he had to stay there overnight to put everything in order. On top of that, Gilbert informs him that he sings in the church choir, and the rehearsal is about to start. The same program with the mysterious man appears on television again, and he calls for an immediate stop to the signal that is hypnotizing everyone. The broadcast once again causes severe headaches, and the townspeople breathe a sigh of relief when the television returns to the baseball game. Worried, Gilbert rushes to the church again, and this time George decides to follow him. In fact, he heard the choir singing in the church, so he figures he won't arouse any suspicion if he goes inside. In the church, he discovers a mini chemistry lab and a mysterious inscription on the wall. They live, we sleep. The man notices a tape recorder playing the choir singing loudly. It only serves as a cover to drown out the noises of the secret meeting that is taking place behind the wall. In the next room, Gilbert, the TV host, and other members of the secret group try to hack the channel again to broadcast their recordings longer and reach more viewers. The group members want to recruit as many people as possible to communicate their ideas to society more effectively and efficiently. Overhearing their conversation, George steps back and stumbles upon a secret safe containing countless boxes. He decides to leave this mystery behind, closes the safe, and is about to leave when he runs into the blind priest. The priest touches his face and hands and releases George. He recognized George as a worker and immediately, without hesitation, began talking about the revolution. George was disturbed by all this and ran out of the church. The preacher shouted at the guy that he would come back eventually. A police helicopter appeared and began circling above the church, making the meeting attendees nervous. Soon the helicopter took off and George borrowed binoculars from a local teenager and kept an eye on what was happening in the building. Gilbert and his men carry the boxes out of the building and put them in the car. George's surveillance is interrupted by Frank. Nada immediately tells her friend what she saw in the church, but Frank doesn't want to get into trouble and advises her not to interfere with what's going on either. Meanwhile, the car loaded with boxes drives away from the church. George watches the church through binoculars all day, but nothing else happens. In the evening, the camp and church were surrounded by police. People did not know exactly what crime they were committing and silently watched what was happening. Suddenly, the police used bulldozers to destroy countless tents and caravans of people, causing panicked people to disperse. Horrified, George watched the chaos unfold as the police brutally destroyed the lives of good people. Law enforcement arrested and rounded up the priest and preacher on television. They tried to resist desperately, but the police beat them until they could no longer breathe. The same fate awaited all those who did not escape the camp. George could do nothing to help those who had been captured by the police, but he did save a teenager who was cowering in a corner, terrified. Having barely escaped the police, George and the terrified teenager climbed to the top floor of a ruined church. After wandering through the hallways, they found a room where the remaining survivors were hiding. The people did not understand why they were attacked and had to spend the night in a shelter. In the morning, they emerged from their hideout to inspect what remains of the camp after last night's nightmare. The camp appears to have been stormed, but they find a television in the middle of the camp, which surprisingly is still running and playing funny commercials. Meanwhile, George decides to investigate the secret cellar of the church. The provocative writing on the wall next to it had been covered up during yesterday's raid. George finds a box left in the pantry, the same one Gilbert took from the car yesterday. Just then, a patrol car drove past the church and George was forced to hide from the police. After finding safety, the man opened the box and was disappointed to find dozens of sunglasses inside. He hid the box in the trash and took a pair with him. While walking around town, George decided to put on his glasses and everything around him suddenly turned black and white. The world that was once familiar to him now took on a completely different look. Through the glasses, every billboard, sign, or headline read, "Obey, marry, procreate, consume, buy, don't think, watch TV," etc. Instead of flashy magazine photos, he saw a series of phrases that enticed and called to obey. Even people who had seemed normal before now revealed their true monstrous faces through the glasses. He took them off and put them on again several times to make sure that the man standing before him really looked like an alien. The stranger looked at George suspiciously, but fortunately did not say or do anything. Once again, George put on his glasses and saw the words "This is your God" on the ticket. He also discovered that at every traffic light in the city, the transmitters emitted a hypnotic voice. She kept repeating the command, "Go to sleep." Nada quickly realized that not all people were the same. Surprised, he watched normal people calmly communicate with people who looked like alien monsters, and it immediately became clear that monsters were the most successful species in society. Entering the supermarket, George notices a politician speaking on television, and an alien is also hiding behind his face. The guy starts laughing hysterically at this revelation. He can't help but insult the woman pushing him, who also looks like a monster through his glasses. Lady informs the other aliens about the existence of a person who can see their true appearance through the walkie-talkie on her watch and describes his appearance. Receiving the message, other aliens came towards him. George ran out into the street in horror. Here, many aliens stared at him, but the man paid no attention to them and insulted the strange woman. He was then immediately arrested by fake police. They interrogated George and asked where he got the glasses, but the guy did not say. The guards then threatened him and tried to convince him to join them, but George was not to give in so easily. He beat the police, snatched their weapons, and drove them away. Police cars were immediately on the scene. Armed with weapons, George decided to hide in the bank. There, he discovers that half of the tourists are also aliens. Fueled by adrenaline, he opens fire on the aliens hiding in human form. One of the aliens calls another police squad and magically disappears before George can shoot him. In an attempt to escape the alien pursuers, he leaves the bank and notices a drone following him. George knocks him out and heads to a closed parking lot where he meets a cute girl named Holly. He assures her that she is human, takes the girl hostage, and orders her to be taken home. This is the only way for him to escape the pursuers who are rushing towards the bank. At Holly's house, George falls to the ground, exhausted, and tries to explain the reason for his actions. He apologizes to the girl for the inconvenience caused. He tells her that their world is in danger and that power has been taken over by evil creatures who control everyone around them. George invites Holly to put on her sunglasses and see for herself, but she refuses and doesn't believe him. As the man closes his eyes, exhausted, Holly tries to quietly walk past him, but he watches her every move. After a while, George calms down and asks the hostage what she is doing. Holly reveals that she works as a television assistant director. George remembers that the aliens are sending their signals through the television and wants to disrupt it. Just as the guy was about to lose his guard, the girl smashed the bottle on his head and pushed him out the window. After falling from the second floor, George miraculously survived but lost his sunglasses. Meanwhile, Holly informed the police about what happened and called a police team to her address. Nada was forced to hide from the guards again and found a safe place under a bridge. When night fell, the guy moved to another neighborhood and spent the night on the street. The next day, he went to the construction site to ask Frank for help in fighting the aliens. His friend was scared of him because George had just organized a big gunfight and killed a lot of people. George tried to tell Frank that they were not people but aliens in disguise, but he did not listen to anything George said and told him to leave. George then went to where he hid the box full of sunglasses, but all the trash cans were empty. The man saw a garbage truck parked nearby. He climbed into the back of the truck and rummaged through the trash, finding a few pairs of glasses that had been left behind. Frank happened to witness George's adventure in the trash. Frank gave his friend his paycheck and said he couldn't help him anymore. George insisted that his friend put on the glasses so he could see the real world too, but Frank refused, believing that his friend had gone crazy. Tired of being doubted, George decides to hit his friend and a violent fight ensues between them. Nada ends up kicking his friend and forcing him to wear his glasses. Surprisingly, Frank eventually believes George, horrified by the reality. The friends rent a room at a nearby motel where they discuss their next course of action. Frank assumes that there are other people seeing aliens and they must be looking for them. George tells him a story from his childhood. Living in extreme poverty he was constantly abused by his father. The severe class inequality has caused hatred among the common people, which has motivated aliens over the years. Now George intends to take revenge on them for his broken life. In the morning, the friends meet Gilbert at the motel, who is also wearing sunglasses. He invited them to a secret meeting of like-minded people, which took place that evening. The friends went to the address and met other psychics of different ages. They were exchanging their sunglasses for modern lenses that were safer for their eyes and gave them clearer images. Gilbert tells them in detail who these creatures are that have overrun Earth. It turns out that the alien invaders are recruiting ordinary humans for their own purposes, promising them wealth and power in exchange for their loyal service. To them, Earth is just a business and a temporary resource to form the third world. All global disasters and climate change are also their work. When the aliens have completely exhausted Earth, they will move on to enslave new planets. One of the resistance members shows Frank the alien watch, and he decides to take it. The protesters fail to decipher the alien device's code, which allows them to move freely in space and communicate with each other. Gilbert gathers everyone and says that they still don't have enough troops for a major attack, but the group is belligerent and insists that immediate action is needed. Gilbert calms the crowd and suggests that they first find the source of the signal and hack it to wake everyone up from their trance. Holly appears in the room and gives clues as to where the signal might be. She nervously fiddles with George's sunglasses and apologizes to him for what she did. Their conversation is interrupted by the sudden appearance of the police, who open fire on the group. Most of the resistance members get lost while trying to escape, but George, Frank, and Holly escape the building unharmed. Armed to the teeth, the friends fight off the aliens and hide in an alley. George wants to go to the epicenter of the massacre to find Holly, but Frank stops him from carrying out his dangerous idea. He tries to figure out how the watch works so he can intercept the aliens' communication, conditions, but it unexpectedly opens a portal to another world. The police are getting closer and closer to the Friends' hideout, so they have no choice but to jump into the portal. They eventually reach an underground alien base, where they find writings in an unknown language. The Friends cautiously move along the corridor and come across an alien checkpoint. Creatures disguised as soldiers reported on the radio that the operation to destroy the terrorist group had been successfully completed. Satisfied, the aliens leave to celebrate their victory, and Frank and George head toward the noises coming from down the hall. They find themselves at a gala dinner, where a man in an expensive suit gives a speech praising the alien alliance. He cheerfully informs the recruited guests that the aliens will soon completely take over Earth, which will greatly benefit the human elite. He then shares statistics on their success with the audience, causing everyone to cheer and applaud. The Friends are approached by one of the camp's former residents, who has also sided with the invaders. He decides that George and Frank are also recruited by aliens and is surprised that they are still dressed as beggars. The man decides to give the recruits a tour of the base and takes them to an alien airfield. There, aliens in human form travel to other planets in the universe. They then go to the backstage area of the television studio, where the entire operation is controlled. Signals are transmitted around the world via satellite, enslaving the consciousness of ordinary humans. Out of flattery, George tricks their tour guide into taking them inside the television studio. The man accepts, but the guards refuse to let them pass without special passes. So the boys decide to use force and shoot the alien. Their old acquaintances try to stop them and convince them to submit to the new government. The aliens have enslaved the entire planet and control every human action. He invites them to join the victors and enjoy the benefits the aliens will give them for their loyal service. Despite his arguments, the boys have no intention of becoming traitors. A soldier bursts into the room. The traitor takes advantage of this moment to move into space. The Friends take up arms and enter the studio to the main office where the recruits work. George interrogates the staff, trying to find Holly with their help, but no one knows where she is. However, he learns that the human hypnosis signal is on the roof. The Friends immediately go to the top of the building and on the way meet Holly, who has survived. By shooting the aliens, the trio finally reach the top floor. But Holly turns out to be a traitor and shoots Frank mercilessly in the head before entering the roof. George finds a satellite dish broadcasting the alien signal and takes aim at it, but the girl quietly approaches him from behind and tells him to surrender, pointing a gun at him. He refuses and shoots Holly first. He then destroys the satellite dish. The helicopter immediately opens fire on George, but as he leaves the world, he mockingly gives the alien his middle finger. George manages to disrupt the signal and humanity finally learns the shocking truth about reality. Now they can all see that aliens are hiding among ordinary people, broadcasting television shows, frequenting the same facilities as them, making movies, and even starting relationships. Thanks to a simple tramp from Colorado, the world was able to wake up from its long slumber. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Leave a comment about your favorite movie and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.